This is the second episode in a three-part series. This episode mentions alleged intimate partner violence. All parties discussed are assumed innocent unless proven guilty in a court of law. This is The Fall Line. Last episode, we introduced you to Suzanne Timms. Her mother, Patricia Otto, has been missing from Lewiston, Idaho since 1976. Suzanne was only 3 years old when her mother disappeared. Her sister, Natalie, was 5. And their father, Ralph Otto, was publicly named by local police as a suspect in their mother's disappearance. For many years, Suzanne and Natalie believed that their mother had left them, and their father, who died in 1983, took any answers he might have had to the grave. But now, as an adult, Suzanne has been investigating her mother's disappearance, and she believes that to do that, she may need to help solve another case too, the identification of a Jane Doe homicide victim discovered in 1978 in another state. When we left off last time, it was May of 1976. Just a few months before Patty Otto's children saw her for the last time. Patty, who was just 24 years old, had moved out that spring. Her husband, Ralph, was 42. Ralph's drinking and their relationship issues had become too much, and they'd begun divorce proceedings. While Patty was living in her own apartment, she'd had a short, romantic relationship with an old friend named Randy. He was just around her age. Although it's alleged that Ralph had numerous affairs, and they were separated when Patty dated Randy, Ralph was extremely upset about the relationship. That's supported by both his statements to police and our own interviews. But things were over with Randy by Mother's Day of 1976. According to family accounts, Patty returned to the Otto home. Suzanne tells us it was encouraged by Ralph's doctor as support for his treatment plan. He'd recently completed an inpatient program for alcoholism. But a number of family accounts, they support that Ralph was drinking again by July of 1976. Many of those interviews and notes were collected either in police files or by Natalie, Suzanne's sister. It's also how we know that Patty joined the family support group, Al-Anon, that summer. Though she'd returned home, it seems that Patty was making plans. She'd enrolled in night classes, and her parents, who lived nearby, they often watched Suzanne and Natalie. This was the case on the night of August 31st. On the last night that Patty was seen, she'd gone to secretarial training class. The girls were at her parents' place. Her father told police that when Patty arrived back at their home, it was around 9 p.m. She stayed to have a beer with her parents and visit for a while. According to police transcripts, they discussed some of the issues that she'd been having with Ralph. Patty's father, Tom, was asked, quote, "Were there any discussions about Ralph being intoxicated or them being in some type of domestic dispute?" And Tom replied, quote, "Yes, there was." He went on to explain that Patty told them about a disagreement regarding a past girlfriend of Ralph's. Tom explained that by that time, Suzanne and Natalie had gone to sleep. The family helped Patty carry them out to the car so she could drive them the short distance home. And, Tom said, he never saw his daughter again. We can't say exactly what happened after Patty made it back home. There's Ralph's story, of course. Per police files, he said that Patty arrived and they had an argument. He told police that Patty had put the kids back to bed, and then they began to have a fight about their marriage. Per police transcripts, Ralph claimed that she told him, quote, to go to hell because he'd been drinking, and that, quote, she was 24 years old and I was 42. She said, "I can get anybody I want." Then he claimed that she discussed divorce, and Ralph said that he brought up Randy, the man Patty had dated earlier in the year. Per his own interview, Ralph said, quote, "I told her I was going to kill the little f***er." Ralph told police that he believed Patty had been with Randy that night. So we have to assume he thought that she hadn't been in class. There's no actual evidence to support that theory, though, and Randy has repeatedly stated that he didn't see Patty after May. Further, law enforcement checked with the school. Patty was in class that evening. Ralph told police the argument heated up. He told Patty they'd go ahead and get divorced then, and then shared some new information. He'd actually been the one to file for the divorce that January. We know that it's what Patty wanted too, so it's Possibly it's simply that Ralph had the means to do so. After all, he's the one that had a lawyer. They'd put a pause on the proceedings, though, when Patty returned home. According to Suzanne's notes, Patty may have taken off her wedding rings and thrown them during this fight. This is notable, as we know that the wedding rings were later found in Ralph's possession. They were turned over to his lawyer. Ralph claimed that they argued for about an hour, and that he went to bed, but that he didn't fall asleep. He said that he heard a car horn honking outside at some point. Patty never came to bed, and he told police that, quote, apparently she got up and left, sometime after he went to the bedroom. Ralph said that he couldn't say for sure where the horn came from, outside their home or down the street. But he claimed that when he woke up in the morning, Patty wasn't in the house. He checked everywhere, but there was no sign of her. He did agree with police that it was, quote, not likely that she would ever leave her kids. So he began to call her family members. Eventually, he arranged for Patty's youngest sister, Alice, to come pick up the girls and take them to her place to watch them so that he could look for Patty, and for Randy, with a gun. We told you about that last episode, and Ralph's own police interviews, they state as much. That was the story that Ralph told. But Suzanne remembers something different about the night that her mother disappeared. We need to remind you at this point that Suzanne's name has not always been Suzanne. She was born Dallas Otto and changed her name several years after Patty's disappearance. This will come up just a little later in the episode, and we'll continue to refer to her as Suzanne to avoid confusion. But do keep it in mind, it's important to her story. Suzanne was troubled by something she'd seen, but the problem was, she wasn't sure if she had seen it. Remember, Suzanne was only 3 years old that night. It's not something she can verify now, but the fact that she has these memories and made these statements, they're recorded in police files. For a long time, Suzanne thought that she'd had a bad dream that night, on August 31st. As she told NBC KHQ in 2022, quote, I had images in my mind of my mother being strangled, his hands around her neck, dragging her. And when she woke up the next morning, things were chaotic. She was taken to her Aunt Alice's. Her mother was gone. Her father was largely absent. Natalie believed that Patty would return any day. She told Suzanne so, but Suzanne wasn't so sure.
So Natalie and I initially went to go stay with Patty's sister. Right after Mom disappeared, Dad brought us up to Aunt Alice's house the day after. And we lived there for several months, all the way through December, actually. I thought that Alice was going to become our mom and that I was going to get to have 2 baby brothers because Alice had 2 little boys. So I was just set like, oh, I'm fine. I will totally stay here. I don't know why I'm much more adaptable than my sister, as where my sister has this mindset of, no, we've got to get home. I'm like, it's fine. Dad says she don't want me, Mom. And Alice is a great mom. I'm fine being here and I'll just stay here and this will be my happy little life. It's almost Christmas time. And Natalie keeps telling me that Patty's going to come home for Christmas. And I'm telling her she's not coming home for Christmas. I'm explaining to her why she's not coming home because I saw what Daddy did to her, right? And I know she's not coming back from that. I know she's gone. And I said that Daddy hit her, Mommy hit Daddy, and then Daddy carried her out. And I was explaining that he carried her out. She's never coming back. And they called the police department, and the police said that they had to have my father's permission to speak with us because we're minors.
When you were little and you told your uncle what you had seen of that night, how did Natalie respond to that?
She told me that it was a bad dream and that Dad would never hurt Mom and that Dad would never hurt us. You know, she reassured me that, you know, that Daddy would never hurt Mommy. And I'm like, I want to believe that, but yet, why would I think I saw that? And she'd say, yeah, you know how you have bad dreams. Remember the time you had the bad dream that the motorcycle was after you? And I'm like, yeah, remember that wasn't real. It was a bad dream. And that was very scary.
Suzanne was never questioned by police. Ralph didn't give his consent. In fact, when he heard about that call, he arrived at Alice's and he picked them up. But he didn't take them back home. His life was chaotic at that time. Records indicate that in addition to his pursuit of Randy, his drinking had worsened. A family member had removed at least one gun from his home and handed it over to authorities, and others had been confiscated. Per his own statements, he was still taking high doses of prescription medication. So, when he heard police wanted to speak with Suzanne, it seems his solution was to take the girls to his own relatives.
And my dad showed up at the house, punched my Uncle Dan in the face, took Natalie and I, and we were not allowed to go back there. He then brought us to his sister's home, who I think at that point I had only met once in my life at a family dinner. There was not a relationship with them. We had not been seeing them on a regular basis. This was a complete stranger in my mind, somebody who I had seen once. I probably saw Bonnie more than I saw Aunt Marcy.
Aunt Marcy, Ralph's sister, never believed that he had anything to do with Patty's disappearance. Back in 1997, the Lewiston Tribune reported that though the Lewiston Police Department soon suspected foul play and Ralph Otto became the target of its investigation, Marcy felt that Ralph had been, quote, harassed by investigators. She told reporters she thought that Patty was ready to leave Ralph, and that she'd made comments on occasion such as, quote, next time I leave, he was going to know what it's like to raise kids on his own. Though Marcy had not known Natalie or Suzanne well up until that point, she quickly took on the role of caring for them. It was something Suzanne badly needed. Her Aunt Marcy and Uncle Bud lived on a farm with their own children, and they took in foster children too. They went to church, they gave the girls chores, and they provided stability. Suzanne and Natalie knew nothing of what was happening with their father, and what Suzanne had told her other aunt and uncle about, she was assured over and over that it was a dream. Suzanne said that she adjusted easily, but Natalie, not so much. She resisted viewing Marcy as their new mother figure.
Natalie had the continuous belief that Patty was going to return, and she would assure me all the time that Patty was going to return. I immediately started calling her mom, and Natalie would correct me over and over again. She is not your mom. Don't call her your mom. And I would just say, Tell yourself what you want. I need a mom, and she's willing, and I like her, and I'm keeping her. And I would not let her out of my sight. I followed her like a hawk. Wherever Aunt Marcy was, I was right on her. I'm like, you are not getting out of my sight, not leaving me.
Law enforcement did investigate possible foul play in Patty's disappearance, but there were difficulties. For one thing, a lack of evidence that anything violent had occurred at the home. In terms of why Ralph Otto's house wasn't searched, in an official sense, the Lewiston Tribune interviewed retired Officer Tom Saline. Back in the 1970s, he was one of the principal investigators working on Patty's case. Decades later, he told the paper there was, quote, a shovel leaned against a wall and a wet tarp on the ground where it had just been sprayed off, but that it wasn't enough to get a search warrant. Saline pointed out that while Ralph owned land in various places, quote, he couldn't find enough gaps in Ralph's alibis for him to have gone far from Lewiston, and there were no signs that Ralph had disposed of Patty's body at his own home. Though he did have various vehicles, including a trailer or a camper that could have been used for transport, law enforcement didn't have access to search them. And then there was the matter of some early confusion regarding whether Patty might have accessed funds after her disappearance. A few different factors played into this. There were 2 check inquiries for police to follow up on. The first regarded a check or checks that had been used at a clothing shop in Lewiston, allegedly by Patty, after her disappearance. However, it was later proven that Ralph had taken Bonnie, his previous girlfriend, and the woman whom he'd been living with when he met Patty, to that clothing store. Apparently, he'd bought her several items of clothing just after Patty's disappearance. Officer Tom Saline was able to verify that with Bonnie. The second check situation was trickier to unravel. In November of 1976, Lewiston Police Captain Dwayne Ayler noted that Vicky contacted law enforcement and said that, quote, just recently, this check had been processed through the bank, but returned to her, showing that the check was cashed in the Portland, Oregon area, and apparently had been cashed at a bank after her reported disappearance. That has always been a little confusing, and police couldn't follow that lead to its end. But there's certainly no indication in the police files that they believed that Patty was alive or in Oregon. There's never been any activity on Patty's Social Security number or any effort on her part to access any other funds. There are a few possibilities that might solve this puzzle. The most obvious one is that someone else cashed the check, presumably to try and make it look like Patty was alive. That theory isn't as outlandish as it might seem. After all, at least one person called the Lewiston Tribune newspaper in the fall of 1976, claiming to be Patty. That seemed equally unlikely, though. Why call the newspaper and not her family? But there may have been other reasons. In the midst of the investigation into Patty's disappearance, another shocking event occurred. Ralph was arrested, not for anything directly related to Patty's death, but rather, according to the Lewiston Tribune, for, quote, attempting to hire a hitman to murder Chief Ayler. Per the Tribune, Ralph Otto felt he was, quote, harangued by Captain Ayler, who was, quote, trying to get more details on his wife's disappearance. Ralph told the newspaper that he, quote, challenged Dwayne Ayler to a fight, that he wanted to, quote, whoop his ass and get it over with. Per the Tribune, there was evidence introduced that, quote, Otto tried to hire a hitman for $1,000 to kill Ayler, not knowing that this so-called hitman was an undercover officer. He was subsequently arrested, tried, and convicted by June of 1977. By that point, Suzanne and Natalie had been living with Marcy and Bud for months, but they'd been expecting to go back home. They had no idea that their father had even been on trial. They'd live with Bud and Marcy for the next 4 years, with little understanding of what had really gone on. Suzanne said that it was a happy home, and she loved the farm. But Patty's disappearance and Ralph's absence, those issues weighed on the girls.
So Dad goes to prison, and we're told that he's in timeout and that he'll be in timeout for a few years, which he was sentenced to 10 years. And in my mind, as a 3 to 8-year-old kid, I thought maybe he was speeding, maybe he was driving too fast because he'd been pulled over for that. I had no idea it was for attempted murder. Neither one of us had any idea that it was for attempted murder. And then as far as the visits, we only visited him one time. We flew down to Boise and we went into the prison, the Idaho State Maximum Penitentiary. And I remember it being so exciting because I thought, oh, we're going to take Daddy with us because I got to sit on his lap. And he was telling us about the doll houses that he was building for us. I sat on his lap and I'm so excited. Daddy's coming home. And then they explained it's just a visit. I was only 5 at the time, more than likely around the age of 5. And I'm like, a visit? Like, why wouldn't we be taking him home? And after that visit, I believe that Natalie and I both kind of were acting out and upset about the whole thing that we didn't get to go home with our dad. And we never got to go see him again. She let us talk to him via letters. And he wrote us letters, which I do still have. And he would draw us pictures and he would make us things. He made us leather vests, leather purses. He made us doll houses. He used his time to keep his mind and his hands busy. And again, because he had money, he was able to purchase these things and participate in crafts.
Suzanne tells us that during those years, she and Natalie bonded in a way that few can understand. While Marcy and Bud were very active in parenting them, she felt in many ways that Natalie was also a parent to her. Her sister took care of her, and they were extremely close. But they differed on their view of their home. She told everyone that Marcy was her mother, and she didn't talk about Patty. Natalie told them that Patty had gone off to set up a new home for the girls. It was a tension that they couldn't reconcile. And 4 years into Ralph's sentence, their lives were uprooted again.
Thankfully, he had all that money that he'd been working for, so he got an attorney and he fought it. And he took that case to the Supreme Court and overturned it. So when I'm 8 years old, Dad gets out of prison and he just shows up at the house and picks us up and we go home, back to the same house.
In terms of why Ralph Otto's conviction was overturned, the Lewiston Tribune reported that, quote, his conviction on that charge was overturned in 1981 because Idaho didn't have a law on the books saying that hiring someone to pull the trigger was equivalent of attempted murder. The Tribune notes that since then, the law has been revised. Reporting from the time focused on the fact that his act amounted to, quote, mere solicitation, that is, quote, encouragement, but not the direct action of a crime. Because of that, he won his appeal. When he was released, Suzanne was in second grade. She and Natalie left the little school they'd been attending, and they returned to the home where they lived with Patty, a place they hadn't called their home in years. It was a huge adjustment, especially for Suzanne, who considered Marcy her mother. When she went to her new school, she didn't discuss Patty's disappearance. While Patty was missing, Ralph had followed through with the divorce, so Suzanne decided to just tell people that her parents were divorced. It was simpler.
Now I had to explain why this single dad was dropping me off. Well, where's your mom? We come to your house. Where's your mom? How come your mom's not making us sandwiches? Where's your mom? And I'm like, oh, they're divorced. She, they get divorced and you never see them again. That's how it works. Obviously, that's not how it works, but that's the story that I told them.
The girls had been used to regular meals, chores, and a schedule with Marcy and Bud, but that all changed.
We lived with him my second grade year. We were there all year long. He was a very absent parent. He was either passed out drunk on the couch or he was gone. There were times when he was gone for days, and we're 8 and 10. And we're just children. So we called his friends. We would call family members and be like, could somebody drop off some food? We would eat candy for meals. I mean, it was not a good year.
And I can tell you that when Dad was passed out on the couch, that I remember this feeling. I remember taking his cowboy boots off. I remember looking in the fridge and there being Mrs. Butterworth syrup, a big container of Mrs. Butterworth, and pink champagne. And I had pink champagne and syrup for dinner. I clearly remember that. I also remember that we would make TV dinners and that I burnt myself on the stove. And I was thinking, I don't know if I'm old enough to be running this stove, but I can't eat it frozen. So we learned how to use a stove. I remember we got a microwave in 1983 and we thought we were the coolest people in the whole world because we got a microwave so we could make hot bologna sandwiches. My dad had money, and when he would pass out, we would just take it out of his shirt pocket and say, Dad, we got to get dinner. We got to go get dinner. And so we would take money and go buy candy. I don't know how I survived that year. It was insane. And if you think about it, this is the time in Lewiston where the Lewis Clark serial killer abducts that little girl and murders her. And we're just out running around all over town by ourselves. No protection. We thought it was incredible. We thought it was the best year of our lives because we had no supervision. We had nobody to tell us no. The crappy thing was not having food, but obviously he would make up for it on the days when he was, wake up, be alert and take us out to dinner and spoil us, or take us into Kmart, give us $100 and tell us to buy whatever we want. He was very, very generous when he was present, but he was not present the majority of the time. He never spanked us for anything. He never raised his voice to us. He spoiled us. We were spoiled and loved. And I never questioned or doubted that he really loved me to infinity. That's what he would tell us. He would love us to infinity, and that he never imagined that he would love us like that. He wasn't expecting that these little kids were going to come in his life and that he was going to love us so much. And I believe he really did love us. I believe he wanted to make a right out of the wrong that he had done, and he was going to try his best and do his best, but he was too much of an addict to overcome his addiction to be able to handle it. There were a couple of incidents where we didn't get the best of care, and we're not being fed, and there were some accidents that happened, and he said, I'm not safe and I need to bring you back out to Aunt Marcy's house.
When the girls returned to Marcy's, Ralph's health deteriorated quickly. After his release from prison, Ralph had talked to the newspapers about grand plans, leaving the country even, but that never panned out. He wasn't well, and he wasn't off law enforcement's radar either. But they'd had other serious investigations going on in the area while he was in prison. A number of other women and girls had gone missing in the region in the late 1970s and the early 1980s. There were also murders, and the disappearance of at least one man. To be clear, Ralph was in no way suspected of these disappearances and deaths, but it meant multiple investigations were going on in a relatively small area. In fact, at the time that Natalie and Suzanne were roaming Lewiston on their own, Suzanne told us there was an apparent serial killer operating in the region. Per CrimeWire, there were several murders and disappearances in the Lewiston-Clarkston area that may have been tied to a single perpetrator. The disappearance of 12-year-old Chrissy White, the murder of college student Kristen David, and the related cases of Christina Nelson, Brandy Miller, and Stephen Purcell. The young woman disappeared on a nighttime walk, and Stephen, who was 35, from the Civic Theater in Lewiston. Stephen knew both women, and while he was initially viewed as a suspect, police later came to believe that he may have witnessed something related to their disappearance. Though the two women's bodies were eventually located, Stephen was never recovered. Despite a number of confessions and a strong suspect linked to at least 3 of the crimes, no one was officially charged. Patty went missing in the same rough time frame, but nothing in police files indicates that they considered her disappearance as connected to the other cases. With these cases and others taking precedence in Lewiston, the search for Patty was probably on the back burner, though law enforcement certainly did not forget about Ralph. They did finally get a warrant to search part of his residence, on suspicion of an unrelated theft. But when retired Officer Tom Saline spoke with the Lewiston Tribune, he said that they didn't find much. Per the Tribune, quote, only when someone told police years later about a secret room in the house were they able to get a warrant. Behind paneling in the basement, they found a small area, a few feet square, containing 2 jet pumps that had been reported stolen from Valley Boat and Motor, but nothing else. Ralph was arrested again in 1983, but not for anything related to Patty. According to the Tribune, Ralph was arrested, quote, for a failure to appear warrant by Clearwater County Sheriff's Department in Idaho. Apparently, this had to do with a theft charge. That's as much detail as any source mentions, but it isn't clear if it's related to the jet pumps found at the house. At the time of Ralph's second arrest, the girls were already living with Marcy and Bud. Ralph had only been in police custody for a couple of days, some sources say as little as 48 hours, when he suffered a fatal heart attack. Suzanne and Natalie, they didn't even know he'd been arrested.
We came home from school in November, and Aunt Marcy sat us down and just told us that she was really sorry that Dad had had a heart attack. And again, I have a 10-year-old brain at this time. I don't know what a heart attack is. Is he in the hospital? Are we going to go see him? But I don't realize this means he's dead and he's not coming back. Nobody's ever died in my life. I don't know what that means. So I literally went to a funeral thinking I'm going to see my father alive. So I'm like, I don't understand why everybody's so upset. Obviously, he's going to get care in the hospital, and a heart attack is whatever, it's fixable. And no, big shock when you're like, why is everybody crying and why is he in a box? What's going on? This doesn't look good. My mom's not here. My dad is dead. And nobody's really telling me what's happening because they think I'm a child that can't handle it. And I'm like, I am a 10-year-old. I am not a baby. I deserve to know the truth. Why are people prancing around the real situation here? And I remember being extremely pissed.
That feeling, it was a turning point for Suzanne. She'd largely avoided thinking about the whole situation and concentrated on her relationships with Natalie and her aunt and uncle. But this brought a shift. She started thinking about Ralph's trial, and that made her think about Patty too.
I started asking my own questions, and I ask a lot of questions. I want to know why nobody's telling me the truth. And I just continued to dig. And I was probably 12 when I found a folder that had all the newspaper articles in it. And I read everything, and I'm like, my life is a total lie. Everything that I have been told is such crap. Everybody at my school knows all these things. Everybody who knows me knows all these things. And nobody's willing to tell me the truth. So I found them. They were hidden in the bathroom closet under a bunch of things in a leather binder. And I'm like, so I'm in the bathroom reading all these documents. And I'm like, oh my God. He's arrested for attempting to kill a cop. Everybody knows this. This is front page over and over again in the front page of the newspaper. Everybody at school knows this. I've been playing this like Marcy's my mom and I have this perfect life, and everybody knows this. They know it's just crap. And Natalie tries to appease me of that. Yes, they know, but I mean, there's no way of really knowing, right? I mean, that's their theory of what happened. She insisted that Dad was set up. That was a setup. They entrapped him, and that Mom could still be out there. I wanted to just be like my mom and run away and never come back. So I changed my name from Dallas Otto to Suzanne Smith. I picked that name myself. I wanted nothing to do with him or her. I didn't know what to believe or who to believe and why nobody felt that Natalie and I could handle the truth. We legally did it, legally changed it. And my teacher is the one that explained to them that Dallas is now legally adopted by Marcy and Bud Smith. So she becomes a Smith child. And she's explaining it to them that she's a Smith child. And because she's changing her last name to Smith, she's chosen to change Dallas to Suzanne. So from now on, we call Dallas Suzanne. And I remember the little placard on my wooden desk gets changed. Screw Dallas. I am not Dallas anymore. And when anybody tells my story and they're writing about it, I'm like, no. Suzanne didn't say that. Dallas said that. Dallas experienced that. And it's not like I have a split personality, but that divides my life because that was what happened when I was Dallas. And when I became Suzanne, I become somebody who knows the truth. And I now have some control over my life and what I'm being told and how I am absorbing that information. Dallas didn't have a choice. Dallas was lied to, and she was coddled and treated like a child because I was 3 at the time. So I think my peers handled it pretty well, that they were like, I don't blame you. I don't blame you for not wanting to be Dallas. That poor kid's been through some hell. A 10-year-old knows right from wrong. It's hard not to be resentful to say that you were treated like a child who couldn't handle the truth. But once Natalie and I started discovering, there's a lot of information out there, we just kept seeking more information. And we had to turn 18 before we could get the police reports. So we had to wait quite a while to actually get the police reports, but we eventually did. And we had more information than any child should have ever had.
After a lifetime of so little information, suddenly Natalie and Suzanne began to find out more than they'd bargained for. But they both processed it very differently. Suzanne said that Natalie was already depressed.
She would spend hours reading books and writing poetry and writing really dark poetry, death and dying poems and reading that. And I would try so hard to pull her out of. I convinced her to be a cheerleader with me. And she struggled.
So Natalie and I, when she turned 18, we requested the records, the police department records, right? We asked for both my mom's case and my dad's case, and we wanted to review the records together. She had left to go to New York, and then she'd come back. So I was probably 17 and she was 19. And we sit down and start reviewing. It's this huge stack of papers. And I probably only got 5 pages in. And I remember stopping and looking at Natalie, and I said, it is so clear that Dad's responsible. And she's like, what are you reading? It doesn't matter what I'm reading. And I can't even tell you which report I started with, but it was I swear, only 5 pages. And it was just so clear to me. He did this. He did this. And Natalie's like, no. The police are in on it. The police set him up. He's in on this. I remember just pushing the papers back to her and saying, you can read this all you want. We're looking for a body. And someday her body's going to come up. And Natalie's like, nope, you can't say that without reading the whole thing. Nope. And she spent from that time, and that's probably 1993 till 2006. She dissected those files. She has Post-it notes, highlighted, requested reports, followed up. She spent all that time, and I refused to look at another report again. that's where her and I had a divide that I'm like, nope, he did it. I'm done. I'm not believing that anymore. I want nothing to do with that.
And this made Suzanne think back to her long ago dream, too. That story that she told her aunt and uncle. The story of a physical altercation between Patty and Ralph. But Natalie never wavered on that. Instead, she began to investigate Patty's case, but with the underlying belief that Ralph was innocent.
People ask it all the time. Why would you and her not have these conversations again? And I'm like, I already made it clear how I felt. We're not going to go there again. I don't have to just keep bringing it up that there's no way Dad's innocent. I don't have to. And she would come back with more things, like she was doing her investigation, and I would just say, mm-hmm. Oh, well, okay. That's good. Oh, that's good. Oh, I'm glad you talked to Grandma Whittam. That was a good idea. I'm glad you talked to her.
Yeah.
I'm not going to go against her. I would not go against her. It's so interesting that I would not I wouldn't tell her she's wrong again. Oh, yeah. What's interesting is that's between Natalie and I. When I have to face Ralph's family or I have to face Patty's family, we keep up the facade that Patty ran away. It's so weird because I do look back and see, why was I saying one thing but telling Natalie another? And I can read in our writings to each other. I can see that I'm telling her, no, that's not right. But in 1997, we did a newspaper article update. And I still said at that point, I mean, I guess if she left, she left. It's like, it's possible that she left. But I had already made up in my mind. I know what my dad did. I just am no longer going to go against my sister and say it publicly. That's really interesting that I was still in the mindset and still saying that.
But Natalie still held the faith, and Grandma still held the faith that even though he had an affair, even though he had this relationship, that Patty really just up and left on her own. Grandma swears that Ralph never confessed anything to her or, admitted that he killed her. He insisted that she left. And so Grandma supported his innocence.
We interrupt this program to bring you an important Wayfair message. Wayfair's got style tips for every home. This is Styles Mackenzie helping you make those rooms sing. Today's style tip: when it comes to making a statement, treat bold patterns like neutrals. Go wild, like an untamed animal print area rug under a rustic farmhouse table from Wayfair.com. Arr, fierce. This has been your Wayfair style tip to keep those interiors superior.
Wayfair, every style, every home.
While tips did occasionally come in, there wasn't a lot of new information after the 1970s, so Natalie spent a lot of her time working on compiling information from the past, everything from family letters and statements to Patty's dental records. No matter what she found, she and the majority of the Otto side of the family seemed to believe that Ralph was innocent in Patty's disappearance. While Natalie was engaged in her investigation, she got married and she had one child. That didn't slow her down, though. Suzanne, however, remained disconnected from the research. But Suzanne was not only removed because of her belief in Ralph's guilt. She also experienced a lot of personal upheaval. She got married right out of high school, but the relationship was short-lived. It was not a situation that Natalie approved of, and when Suzanne was ready to leave, she turned to Natalie for support.
Natalie became my mother when Patty disappeared. And then when Ralph disappeared, she became my father. And she took on that role very willingly, and she was very protective of me. When I married that young man from high school, and that was the bad boy that you're not supposed to marry them, you're just supposed to have fun. But I married him and we had 2 children, and I decided this relationship is definitely volatile. I left Idaho in 1999 and moved to Washington to be next to my sister, Natalie, in 1999. So our families just became like one, right? She has her little boy. I have my 2 little boys, and we're kind of just raising them all together. And I'm going to get through this divorce. She's going to support me through this divorce. And I decided I'm going to go to nursing school. I have to have a job to support these 2 kids, and I've got to go to school. I moved here in August of 1999. And by December of 1999, I had gotten really sick. I was having a lot of stomach pain, and I went in to see the doctor because I work at the hospital. I went in to see somebody and they thought maybe I had an ovarian cyst. And I found out I was 5 months pregnant with my daughter. And Natalie's like, we're going to get through this. You're not going to drop out of school. You're going to keep doing what you're doing. And we're going to get through this. And I'm going to help you with this little girl. And this went on until 2005. So the summer of 2005, it's Mother's Day. And we all go back to Bud and Marcy's house in Idaho. And the whole family's gathered there to celebrate Mother's Day and Alexia's 5th birthday. A flash flood happens and we are underwater immediately in this giant house. My 2 kids were outside with Jonathan and they barely got in before the door hit and we're underwater. Thanks to this man who saw this tidal wave of water coming at us. We're not in a flood zone. We are not in a flood zone. We are in a place that they've lived for 40 years. They've never been flooded. We do not understand why. We think Dorshak Dam has broke and that we are underwater. Wow. So we are in the upstairs level of this house, counting my children, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I realize Natalie has 1 and I have 3. I only have 2 arms. And I turned around to her and I said, Nat, we're all going to die here. There is no way we're getting out of this. And she's like, but we're going to die together. And I was like, wait a minute, I have a cell phone. I've got to at least try to call for help. And everybody's like, there's no service. You can't get a line out here. You can up on the hill if I were to get up to the hill, but we're underwater. So I was like, I'm going to get on top of the house. I'm going to try. I'm going to do everything I can. And I'm going to get on top of the house. So I climbed on top of the house. I got 911. I called and told them that we were underwater. And they said that there had been some kind of a flash flood, that the dam hadn't broken, that the water will recede, and that they will send rescue. So they send rescue, and we know that none of us died, but if the water continued to rise, the house is going to give up. The house is underwater. We're under 8 feet of water or something. We're like, no, we're all in the safe place. But the water recedes. We lost a whole bunch of animals because we're on the farm. Exactly 1 year later, in May of 2006, is when I get the call that somebody in my family needs to know where my boys are at. So 1 year later, in May of 2006, I get this frantic call from Aunt Sherilyn. And I'm like, Aunt Sherilyn doesn't even know I have children. I don't think she's ever even seen them before. And she calls from Marcy and Bud's house saying, Suzanne, this is Aunt Sherilyn. I need to know where the boys are at. And I'm like, what? That's so weird. Like, why would some distant relative be calling me to ask where my boys are at? And I was like, they're at the skate park. Why? And she says, there's an emergency and we need to know where the boys are at. And I was like, okay, I don't know why. Aunt Sherilyn's kind of crazy anyway, but not sure what's going on. But then 15 minutes later, I get a call from the O'Malley side of the family. And they ask me, where are the boys? We need to know where your boys are at. And I'm like, what's going on? We can't tell you. We just need to know. Do you have both boys? Yes, I have both boys. What is going on? You need to call out to Marcy's house. I'm like, okay. So I called out there again and I said, let me talk to my mom. And Aunt Sherilyn said, honey, I can't do that. And she said, I think it's best if you have someone drive you over here, and you need to have someone drive you. And then we'll talk to you when you get here. That's 3 hours away. I'm supposed to drive 3 hours and not know what's happened. I had just started dating this young man who had met my sister. And I called him up and I said, I don't know what's going on, but I think my mom and dad have been in an accident. Can you please drive me all the way back to Idaho? I don't know why they won't let me drive by myself. I think they're thinking I can't handle it if they get in an accident, right? While we're driving, I was like, oh, I need to call Natalie and let her know what's going on. And I called her. She didn't answer. And I was like, oh yeah, she's camping, because they had just called and asked if the boys could go camping. And I said, no. He's like, why did you say no? I'm like, I don't know. Something in me said no. Because I said no, he went to the neighbor's house and asked a little boy to go with them. We pull up at the house, at Marcy and Bud's new house, because remember, the old house flooded. So I pull up at this new house and all the cars are there of my family. And I'm like, oh yeah, my mom and dad have definitely been in an accident. And I walked into that new house and I saw her standing there, Marcy standing there. She started to talk and she said, "I'm so sorry, honey, they're all gone." I put my hand over her mouth. I told her she was a liar, that she only lied to me, that the only thing she'd ever said to me were lies. And I didn't want to hear anymore. And I walked out. I told my boyfriend, just drive me home. Don't listen to what they're saying. There is no way my sister is gone. And they keep calling and they're trying to make funeral arrangements. And I just refuse to talk to them. I refuse to talk about what she was supposed to wear. I refuse to admit that Jonathan was on the boat with her, that there was another child with them. And I just kept thinking, there's no way that 1 year ago I looked her in the eye and said we were all going to die together. And instead they all died together. How is that possible? How can I lose my mother and my father, my sister, my nephew, my brother-in-law? How can God take all of them from me? It just didn't seem like it was possible.
Natalie, her husband Jonathan, her son, and the neighbor child all died as a result of accidental carbon monoxide poisoning. They died in their sleep on the boat they'd taken on their camping trip.
When people say they lost a sibling, they're like, "I lost a sibling." And I'm like, I don't think you quite understand. She wasn't just my sister. She was my world. Even though I was, what am I, 29 at the time? I don't know. It's like, no, she's my world. I don't know how I'm supposed to take a step forward now. I don't understand how I'm supposed to do anything without her now. I really struggled. I obviously still really struggle.
And Suzanne didn't just have to face the loss of Natalie's family. Just 7 years later, in 2013, her 17-year-old son Isaiah passed away as well. With this enormous and compounded pain, she says, she had no energy or space to pick up where Natalie left off.
Isaiah was 17 years old when we lost him, and I will never, ever heal from his loss. I can say it took me years to be able to even talk about Natalie. I know in my heart that I will never heal from having him taken from us. So there's been years, as you can see, that although my mother's case is on my mind, I couldn't dedicate myself or my resources or anything. It's like, okay, I just barely got my nursing degree. I just barely got my feet under me. Okay, I'm just starting to heal. And then I lose Isaiah, and my mom just sat on the back burner through all this. It's like, I don't have time for that. It's not that you forget that you have a missing mother, but I don't have the energy or the time to dedicate to looking into her case. Natalie did. Natalie had more time than I did. Natalie had one child and her job. I have 4 children and my job and school. I just didn't have the time.
Suzanne eventually married that boyfriend, a firefighter, who helped get her through those first days after the deaths of Natalie and her family. And as the years went on, she did begin to think more about Patty's case, when she had the mental and emotional space to begin to reapproach Natalie's work. Natalie had collected so much, and Suzanne began to review it all again. And as she did, she started to put things together from a new adult perspective and to see connections that she hadn't as a child or a teenager. She had not changed her mind about Ralph's alleged guilt, but she became more convinced that what she told her aunt and uncle back in the 1970s, that wasn't a dream. And she also became more convinced that Patty had not left of her own volition. She decided that she needed to advocate for her mother and to get her cold case back in front of the public. Social media seemed like the smartest way to do that. Suzanne wanted it to be a movement, a way to speak for a woman whose voice had been taken away, Patty's voice. So that's what she decided on.
And I also love that I settled on the name Patty's Voice. I don't want it to be my voice. And my mom's voice was taken, but I keep reminding my followers and everybody that's like, we are Patty's voice, and we are speaking up for her, and we are going to bring her home, because it's not just me doing this. It is all these people that have brought tips and clues and suggestions. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I've been seeing it from my lens, my view for so long, to have these people that are willing to dig into this, to pull things out. And I'm like, so grateful, so grateful that they're willing to give me their time to put in for my mom's case, to say she matters, because it certainly didn't feel like she mattered for all the years she was forgotten. Look at all the years that went by that her name was never mentioned. Too many years.
Suzanne had no idea where she might find answers, but she was determined to search. And you can imagine how surprised she was when she found out about a Jane Doe victim who was discovered 2 years after her own mother's disappearance, just 2 hours away. A Jane Doe victim dressed in clothing similar to what Patty was said to be wearing when she was last seen. A Jane Doe victim whose forensic art, Suzanne says, felt shocking to see because, to her, it felt like she was looking into a mirror. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Patricia Otto, please contact Captain Jeff Clone, the Lewiston Police Department, at 208-746-0171. Next time on The Fall Line, Suzanne discovers the case of the Finley Creek Jane Doe, and she meets allies who changed the shape of her investigation. Thank you for listening. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, and pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show on your podcast app of choice. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case and the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified persons cases, is out everywhere as hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books and through your local library. Find out more in the link in our show notes. If you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Patreon or Apple Premium. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who've appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs, which all patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton, with additional research by Brian Waters, interviews by Brooke Hargrove, produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry, content advisement by Brandy C. Williams and Vic Kennedy, and, as always, our most special thanks to Liz Lipka.